Get some!
Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. Apologies for the later start today. We had a few technical issues. Hopefully they're all sorted out now. But since we have limited time because of the technical issues, I'm gonna go ahead and dive right into our first story because it's a sign of exactly what the Republican Party wants to do. It's just that a few of them are smart enough not to try to do it when it could hurt them politically. Senators Mitch McConnell and Rick Scott have not been getting along lately, mainly because for as much as I dislike Mitch McConnell, he's not a dumb guy. Rick Scott, though, seems pretty stupid because he tried to cut certain social spending programs, privatize things like Social Security, which McConnell knows is the third rail, knows you should not try to cut because it will destroy them politically. Now, interestingly enough, Rick Scott's plan does have support from the Republican Party. There's no question about that. But more importantly, Rick Scott's plan to essentially do away with Social Security as we know it is something that is favored by the donors, particularly groups like Club for Growth, which is a billionaire-funded organization that spends tens of millions of dollars each election cycle to ensure that they get people like Rick Scott elected so eventually they can gut social spending programs like Medicare and Social Security. Now, before we get to McConnell and how he kind of plays into all of this, let's talk about what Club for Growth recently said in response to this tiff that McConnell and Rick Scott have with one another. They want McConnell to stop going against Rick Scott. They think McConnell is a bad guy for thinking strategically about what would hurt the party, what would help the party. And they have shown their support for Rick Scott because this is a billionaire organization that doesn't want to pay taxes to fund Social Security. So let's talk about what Rick Scott had proposed and why McConnell is against it. Now, it's an 11-point plan that Scott put out, and sub point 7 and point 6 reads as follows. All federal legislation sunsets in 5 years. If a law is worth keeping, Congress can pass it again. The plan doesn't single out Medicare and Social Security specifically, but these are programs that were established by federal legislation and would thus disappear under Scott's proposal unless renewed every 5 years. Okay, let's just talk about Congress in the context of funding the government, passing an annual spending bill. We know what that's like. We know what it's like to see government shutdowns as a result of Republicans demanding cuts to social spending programs and what remains of our social safety net. So the idea of putting Medicare and Social Security up before Congress every 5 years would do exactly what you would suspect it would do. It would eventually just obliterate these programs, and that's why Scott proposed it in his big plan, which McConnell was against. Additionally, by the way, Scott initially proposed everyone in the United States should pay some federal income tax. Since about 40% of US households currently do not owe federal income tax, mostly because they don't make enough money, Scott effectively would have raised taxes on about 75 million households, the poorest households among us. So privatize or cut Social Security in order to save taxes for the wealthiest people in this country while simultaneously demanding that the poorest among us pay more in federal taxes. Great. I mean, it shows you exactly what the populism on the right looks like. I mean, when you compare the United States to other developed countries, what we have in terms of a social safety net is abysmal. But it's still not good enough for the billionaires in this country. They want less of a social safety net, which should blow your mind considering how many of our fellow Americans are living on the streets today. Can't afford rent, can't afford a mortgage, can't afford to send their kids to a decent college, or if they're in an area that doesn't have decent public schools, can't send their kids to a private school because that's expensive, can't afford healthcare, can't afford childcare, can't afford elder care for their parents. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. No paid family leave. You want me to continue? But not only do Republicans love that, and not only do the billionaires who fund their campaigns love that, they want to chip away at what's left. And Club for Growth loves that. That's the whole purpose of Club for Growth. They don't want to pay taxes, so they want to cut whatever social spending we might be engaging in. Now, of course, nearly all of them already pay other taxes. When we're talking about the poorest Americans, they might not pay federal income taxes, but they pay all sorts of other taxes, which has more of an impact on them economically than the taxes that the wealthiest people in this country pay. So think of things like sales tax. If you're living in a high tax state, chances are they're probably paying something in state taxes as well. Now, we should talk a little bit about what's at play here between Mitch McConnell and Rick Scott, why there's this growing beef between them. Because Rick Scott's just doing what his donors paid him to do. But McConnell's a little more strategic than that. McConnell understands that it's political suicide to go after Social Security and Medicare. So he immediately dismissed the plan, and Rick Scott got real salty about it, okay? Now, on a radio show in Kentucky the following week, McConnell tried to even distance himself from the Republican Party and the Republican Party from this proposal entirely. Let's listen.
President Biden is out shopping his State of the Union claims and still selling the point that the Republicans, he names Rick Scott, that the Republicans want to sunset Social Security and Medicare. So is that true?
Well, unfortunately, that was the Scott plan. That's not a Republican plan. That was the Rick Scott plan. The Republican plan, as I pointed out last fall, if we were to become the majority, there were no plans to raise taxes on half the American people or to sunset Medicare or Social Security. So it's clearly the Rick Scott plan. It is not the Republican plan.
Now, I want to be 1000% clear. Cutting Social Security and Medicare absolutely is a Republican plan. There's no question about it. There's endless evidence of that in the form of television interviews, proposals to raise the retirement age, which by the very nature of doing that, you're cutting Social Security, okay? They want to raise the retirement age to 70, which is insane. So the only difference between Rick Scott and Mitch McConnell is that Mitch McConnell understood, hey, we're campaigning for the midterms and we're not going to attack incredibly popular social spending programs right as we're trying to get people or persuade people to vote for us. What are you doing? You're crazy. But Club for Growth and its billionaire president, David McIntosh, didn't like that. And so they just released a statement. This is a specific statement from David McIntosh, president of Club for Growth, dinging Mitch McConnell for this. While other Republicans have caved to massive tax and spend packages that have strained our economy, Rick Scott has consistently championed small government solutions that are meant to, of course, allow us to pay less in taxes. That's what I added, but I want to help you guys read between the lines. Centered around fiscal responsibility. And because of that, he's faced the unfounded and false attacks of liberal Democrats like President Biden and even establishment Republicans like Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell wants to cut Social Security too, and they know that. It's just that McConnell, again, isn't stupid enough to go through with that plan as they're campaigning for the midterms. Now, I thought that Biden really holding Republicans' feet to the fire during the State of the Union was an important moment. He got them on record denying that they want to cut Social Security, even though we all know they do want to do that. And hopefully he continues to hold their feet to the fire. But we are in a precarious situation when we have corporate Republicans who have always been clear about how they want to gut our social safety net, along with corporate Democrats who might not be as vociferous against Social Security or Medicare, but certainly in the past they have been open to cutting it or cutting those two programs. So as precarious as it is, I don't want anyone to freak out because it is clear based on the reaction from Republicans during Biden's State of the Union that they don't want to deal with the political ramifications of cutting wildly popular social spending programs in the country. But it is something that we have to keep our eyes on and ensure that we don't waver in our fight and our support for these programs, because the second we take our eye off the prize, the second we don't pay attention to what they're up to, I guarantee it, they will try to cut these programs. Now, David McIntosh continued to say that Rick Scott is a proven conservative who has promoted economic growth and fought reckless spending in the Senate. The group's super PAC intends to spend big on Rick Scott's behalf in next year's election, which as of now features no Republican primary opponents. The group also spent a whopping $60 million on Senate races in the last election cycle alone. So these are moneyed interests. These are the very people who have captured our members of Congress, captured our legislature, to the point where they don't really serve the best interests of their constituents and tend to serve the best interests of people who are already doing real well in this country, literal billionaires. And if you're wondering who those billions are, the last round of funding for Club for Growth came from two billionaires in particular, Jeff Yass and Richard Uihlein. They don't need Social Security and they hate paying into it. And let me just mention, part of what makes Social Security long lasting and popular, the reason why it's considered untouchable by many, is because it's a universal program. Sure, those at the very, very top might not need it. But when we see how easy it is for Americans to lose everything in this country, especially with our broken healthcare system that could cause you to go bankrupt in your elderly years, I think Americans understand the importance of maintaining these programs and ensuring that we don't privatize them or cut them in any way. Now, it's not that McConnell, again, doesn't want to cut Social Security. He wants to do it. He's just a little more strategic. He's looking for the right opportunity so the political ramifications won't be as awful. And McConnell has said, quote, "I mean, it's just a bad idea. I think it will be a challenge for Scott to deal with this in his own re-election in Florida, a state with more elderly people than any state in America." And he's right about that. And according to a 2022 study, 88% of the 50+ age cohort also identified Social Security as an extremely important issue when determining who to vote for. When broken down by party line, 91% of registered Democrats compared to 87% of Republicans and 83% of independents identified it as important or very important. Let's keep that graphic up for a second, because 87% of Republican voters see Social Security as an extremely important issue when determining who to vote for. Mitch McConnell might be evil in his own ways, but make no mistake, homeboy's not dumb. Okay, he might be the smartest and most strategic Republican lawmaker in the country. And he's surrounded by morons who don't understand that, hey, I get it, you're supposed to serve your donor, you're a slave to your donor, that's the only thing you really care about. But you gotta at least provide the illusion of giving a damn about your constituents. You gotta at least look at the polling and understand what Americans want to protect, including 87% of Republican voters. But I covered this story not because I want to give Mitch McConnell kudos. No, Mitch McConnell, when given the right opportunity, will cut these programs. I talk about this story because it's important to understand who the real kingmakers are, right? These billionaire donors, who really controls the legislation and whether or not it's ever proposed or passed. And more importantly, it's important for us to keep our eye on this issue and never let up, because the second you do, they will cut these programs, they will privatize these programs, they will do anything their billionaire donors want. When asked, 92% of voters also said they would be more likely to support a Senate candidate who opposes cuts to workers' earned Social Security benefits. This position is overwhelmingly true for Democrats at 97%, and also extremely high, 90% among Republicans and independents. And by the way, you really don't have to look too hard to find other Republicans openly promoting changes to Social Security and Medicare. Get a load of this.
For the first time around in 2010, I just laid out the reality of Social Security. It's a legal Ponzi scheme. It is. I mean, it's a pay-as-you-go system because we have 70% of our budget off budget. We call it mandatory spending, but it's completely out of control. Nobody ever looks at it. It's just on automatic pilot. We ought to put everything on budget so we're forced to prioritize spending. We ought to be looking at the budget in total every year. Again, that doesn't mean sunsetting anything. That doesn't mean putting on the chopping block. That doesn't mean cutting Social Security, but it does mean prioritizing lower priority spending.
Yeah, that means cutting Social Security. I mean, what do you think it means prioritizing other spending objectives? And what are you referring to? I mean, if you want to talk about fiscal conservatism, if you voted in favor of the $2 trillion in tax cuts for the rich under Trump's watch, which Ron Johnson did, I'm not really interested in hearing about your so-called fiscal responsibility. Sit down. But that's Ron Johnson just recently, a senator, Republican senator, making it very clear he's targeting Social Security because that is what they all want to do. So don't let them lie to you. Understand who motivates them, what motivates them, and what their real objectives are. And don't let up, because they've had their eyes on cutting Social Security and Medicare for decades. All right, we gotta take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the train wreck, otherwise known as Marjorie Greene. She has some thoughts about rail safety. Fascinating. Later, we'll also talk about the right-wing reaction to Chelsea Handler's comedic video on not having children. That and more coming up.
Ice cream.
Welcome back to our social break. Thomas Daniel writes, Daniel writes, I love this poem. There once was a man named Mitch. To steal from the poor was his pitch. He said it was fine while having no spine and sold his soul to the rich. That was amazing. Thank you for writing in. I love that poem, and it was completely accurate. Thank you to our YouTube members as well, including Gabby Mathis, who gifted one new TYT membership. We really, really appreciate you, and giving the gift of membership is awesome, so thank you for that. Stop the Stupid says, thank you TYT for making a few hours of my 12+ hour workday better. I'm glad that we're able to do that considering the pretty terrible subject matter we discuss on this show regularly, but thank you for saying that, I really appreciate it. Explore Infinity says, anyone who cuts Social Security would fall. Only an idiot would dare to do that, but they'll pick a sacrifice. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, right? Because I would guess that something like cutting Social Security or privatizing Social Security or Medicare for that matter would be so bad that it might even double the pain that the Republican Party suffered as a result of reversing Roe. Because look, at the end of the day, even though reversing Roe affects all of us, it affects women more. It affects half the population more. When it comes to Social Security and Medicare, we all pay into it. We all see how much we pay into it and when we look at our pay stubs every 2 weeks or every month, depending on when you get paid, right? To then be told that you can't retire until you're 70, that's a massive cut to Social Security. They know it. Right now, the Social Security cap, tax cap, is at, I believe, around $160,000. So any money that you earn over $160,000, which of course most Americans don't make that kind of money, that doesn't get taxed. How about we just lift that tax cap entirely and we don't have any problems with the solvency of the Social Security program? But that's the thing. Republicans don't want that, the donors don't want that. They don't want to pay more in taxes, period. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I hate to do this to you, but we gotta do another Marjorie Greene story because it's on a serious matter. So let's do it.
What we have to do is we have to make sure that our rails are safe. Democrats passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill and only $5 billion went towards rail safety. This is a failure. It would have never happened under a Republican-controlled infrastructure bill.
Is that why Marjorie Greene decided to vote against the infrastructure bill? Because she was concerned that $5 billion for rail safety just wasn't enough money? Is that why she voted against it? Of course that's not why she voted against it. And I guarantee you, if that bill had a provision appropriating $20 billion for rail safety, Marjorie Greene, much like most other Republican lawmakers, would give it the middle finger. Now, we should also remember that when Donald Trump was in office, he did this, cute little thing called deregulation of the rail industry, essentially reclassifying certain chemicals in a way that would allow for the transport of these chemicals in an unsafe way. Should have required a lot more safety, other protocols, but of course that deregulation had an impact. And I'll give you the details of that in just a moment. But of course, while Marjorie Greene pretends to care about rail safety, she goes out of her way to pretty much ignore the deregulation angle. Let's hear more from what she had to say during this interview on Hannity's show, and then I'll tell you the truth.
Is happening every single day, and now thousands of people, birds, animals, they're all sick, and we don't know the consequences of this horrible accident in East Palestine. But we have people like Ilhan Omar. She wants to, crack down on corporate greed when it comes to rails and the privately owned sections of rails. But really what we have to do is we have to make sure that our rails are safe.
Corporate greed has a lot to do with why the train derailments have been happening, why our rails are unsafe. I mean, it's amazing to me because she's like, Ilhan Omar wants to talk about corporate greed. Yeah, because corporate greed is tied to what we're seeing right now in the rail industry. Don't believe me? All right, I'll give you the details here. So first, why don't we actually hear from, the Railroad Workers United, because they pinned the threat on rail industry cuts to inspection staff and the elimination of safety protocol. The East Palestine train was hurried, the nonprofit said in a statement. And though a cause hasn't been fully determined, it appears the train was not properly inspected. Now, I don't know, guys. I don't know. Why would the rail companies eliminate these incredibly important workers, especially since these workers were tasked with following safety protocols, doing the proper, inspections to ensure that the trains were safe, the rail system was safe? Why would they cut all those employees? Could it be maximizing profit, which is tied to, corporate greed? Let me give you more. They cut so many workers that at the peak, there used to be 1 million rail workers. Keep that number in mind. Rail companies laid off more than 20,000 rail workers during a 1-year period between 2018 and 2019, representing the biggest layoffs in rail since the Great Recession. And the nation's rail force has dipped below 200,000, the lowest level ever, and down from 1 million at its peak. Gee, I wonder why they would do that. Could it be because they want to cut costs tied to labor so they can, engage in corporate stock buybacks, maybe some dividends for their shareholders, because that's exactly what happened. That's corporate greed, Marjorie Greene. That's what that is. Let's give you more. They have cut the hell out of the workforce, and there are big plans to cut it further. Just because the rail companies are profitable doesn't mean they're healthy, and that's according to a former Norfolk Southern freight engineer. Of course, Norfolk Southern is the rail company that had the East Palestine train derail last week. So, I mean, is this something that concerns her at all? Or is she gonna attack Ilhan Omar out of nowhere because Ilhan Omar accurately pointed to corporate greed and how it relates to all the derailments that we're seeing and experiencing in this country? I mean, it is amazing though, right? Because just yesterday, Marjorie Greene's like, I don't know, what can I talk about that doesn't touch on corporate greed? Because I can't upset the corporate donors, the Republican Party. I need to avoid it, so what can I blame this on? Oh, I know, the workers, they're lazy. These lazy workers, there's a labor shortage. I mean, there is some evidence to indicate there aren't enough workers, but even before the pandemic begun, the companies were laying off a ton of rail workers. To do what again? Oh yeah, to cut costs, to provide a higher return on investment for their shareholders. That's called corporate greed. I mean, it is amazing. And then there's the deregulation angle. There's a lot going on there. We've talked about it before, but let me remind you again. The US Transportation Department in 2020 approved a rule to allow liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to be shipped via rail with no additional safety regulations. Trains can now run 100 or more tank cars filled with 30,000 gallons of the substance, largely from shale fields to saltwater ports. So 2020, who was in charge in 2020? Oh, that's right, it was Donald Trump. Yeah, that deregulation, not a good idea. But look, to be fair, the Biden administration should have reversed that. We'll get to that in a moment. Just 22 train tank cars filled with LNG, by the way, hold the same amount of energy as the Hiroshima bomb, a coalition of environmental groups wrote in comments to regulators opposing the LNG rail rule change in 2020. And look, the Biden administration was like, yeah, we're gonna reverse the deregulation that Trump did for sure. Like, we're on it, except they haven't done it, okay? So according to The Guardian, under the Biden administration, the Transportation Department, which of course Pete Buttigieg is the head of, has proposed a suspension of the Trump-era LNG rule, allowing the substance to be transported via rail and to replace it with a new rule. But the suspension was supposed to be published in June of 2022, but it and the new rule have been delayed, not once, but twice, and are now supposed to be final in March. We'll see if that happens. David Sirota just caught Pete Buttigieg in a lie where he tried to pretend as though the Department of Transportation can't unilaterally regulate the rail industry. You wanna know how David Sirota caught Buttigieg in a lie? The Department of Transportation responded to his reporting in the form of a tweet to say, no, we actually totally do have the ability to regulate the rail industry unilaterally. Oops. So look, when Marjorie Greene goes after Pete Buttigieg, she's right. I mean, she's attacking him while also ignoring that it's her daddy who did the deregulation in the first place. But I have no problem with the critique toward Pete Buttigieg because there absolutely could be more action taken by the transportation department. And I also agree that he is really not fit for that job, wasn't qualified for that job, but hey, he did drop out of the primary race to give President Joe Biden a boost during the Democratic primary. So favor for a favor, quid pro quo, you know how that works. Now, let's skip ahead a little bit because I want to talk about that corporate greed and exactly what these rail companies do with the money they save from cutting their workforce, so much so that they ignore safety protocols and also overwork the employees who remain, which is why rail workers were about to strike because they're not even allowed to take a day off without retaliation. Family emergency, who cares? We don't have enough workers. There's no one to take your position or fill in for you if you have a family emergency. So no, you can't do it. Now, what they do with that money is fascinating. Let's focus on Norfolk Southern specifically, okay? This headline says it all. This is from the Motley Fool. It was published yesterday. After double-digit revenue growth last year, is Norfolk Southern stock a buy? By the way, their stock is doing great. Totally doing great. Doesn't matter. This disastrous story in Ohio that is putting the local community there in jeopardy, their health in jeopardy, their health at risk, didn't really hit the markets. There's a little dip, right back up. So Motley Fool's like, should we buy this little dip? Because we know it's gonna do well pretty soon. And by today, stock is back up. But let me give you some more details on just how healthy Norfolk Southern is financially. Railway operator Norfolk Southern enjoyed record revenue and operating income last year. Last year's record, $12.7 billion in revenue, marked a 14% gain on an 18% jump in yearly revenue per unit. Oh, they're doing so well. Just fire a bunch of employees. Sure, I mean, you put local communities at risk. There's that whole issue with train derailments, but the profits, the shareholders love the profits. And in a shareholder-friendly move, Norfolk Southern Corporation, NSC, announced that its board has authorized a new $10 billion stock repurchase plan starting in April of 2022. So this was something that was published last year. And I think it's important for you guys to know where their resources go, because they're not investing back into their company to ensure that they have the appropriate workforce to do the proper inspections and avoid these train derailments. No. They fire workers, they save a bunch of money by doing that, and then they take the billions and they park it into their shares to basically artificially inflate the value of their shares. Let's also keep in mind that the executives mostly get paid in stock options, so they literally have a vested interest in beefing up the value of their shares, so that happens. But there's more. Norfolk Southern also rewards its shareholders by paying out dividends. Evidently, NSC has hiked its quarterly dividend payout thrice from March of 2021 to March of 2022. The most recent dividend hike was announced in January of 2021, to be specific, when NSC decided to purchase its quarterly dividend by 14% to $1.24 per share. And they announced that in 2022, not 2021. But you guys get the point. The system is set up to work this way. All right, so if you don't want to call it corporate greed, then just call it the fiduciary responsibility, something that I talk about on the show all the time. This is how the system works. the executives at these rail companies aren't concerned about East Palestine, Ohio. They're not concerned about rail safety. Their number one priority, like any other corporation that's publicly traded in this country, is their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. That means maximizing profits, ensuring that their stock's doing real well, ensuring that their shareholders are happy with their fat dividends, and everyone else can F off. That is how the system is set up, period. So when Marjorie Greene talks about how Ilhan Omar is crazy for mentioning corporate greed, just know that the dumb one is Marjorie Greene, because she is literally a United States lawmaker who doesn't even know how our system works. She's pathetic. I would just love one day where I'm not embarrassed by the lawmakers in Congress. Just one day, just one. All right, we're gonna take a break. When we come back, I'm gonna tell you why everyone hates the news.
Ice cream.
Welcome back to our social break, everyone. Jason Ray writes in and says the rail company pushed for the burn off, not because it was the best option, but because it got the rail lines open faster. Corruption even after the wreck. So I had heard rumors about that. I haven't confirmed it, which is why but I think that you're onto something. I tend to lean in believing that, but obviously I want to confirm it before I just report it as fact on the show. But yeah, this is the way it works. What really stood out to me yesterday when we were talking about the story is how the EPA was like, you know, Norfolk Southern might be responsible for the cleanup. I mean, who else would be responsible? What? It's mind-blowing, really is. Pitchfork's Dragon says, for more on this train wreck story, we turn to another train wreck. Marjorie Greene, what's your opinion on your fellow train wreck? It's really funny. All right, let's scooch up to our YouTube members. Meredith Putbin says, oh, my aching assets. Mondo Lestraka says, hey, conservatives, why don't you ever propose a working class or middle class tax cut? Well, I remember during the Trump era tax cuts, while they were pitching it to the American people, which by the way, polling indicated Americans didn't buy it. They did not want Trump's tax cuts to pass. I remember covering that at the time. But anyway, I remember being at this conference called the Web Summit, the year that they were trying to get this passed, right? The tax cuts passed. And there was a panel of MAGA chuds talking about how it's a middle class tax cut. Unfortunately, when I was there, I had laryngitis and lost my voice. My husband was there with me and I was like, that's for the middle class, for the wealthy. I'm like trying to scream at them, but I couldn't because I lost my voice, it was hilarious. Anyway, Aaron Parker says, it's not just that they don't want to pay taxes. They want to be able to invest in privatized versions of Medicare and Social Security so they can make even more money for less effort. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. The fees associated with things like 401ks, for instance, gives you an idea of what it would look like if we were to privatize Social Security or Medicare. Yeah, okay, so let's go to our Twitch subs. Octo Squiddy says, don't worry, Anna, if this was 6 years ago, you would be 5 minutes early, referring to our late start on the show. You've been watching the show for a long time. I can tell by that reference. Goose Jail says, the COVID finally got me. Gonna watch TYT with pizza and kombucha. Ooh, I like that. Donkey Teeth Bites says, what part of bailing out Wall Street, airlines, car companies, and subsidizing oil companies is fiscal responsibility? They're not fiscally responsible at all, but they love to brand themselves with all sorts of things that they're really the opposite of. Let's get back to the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. In the second hour, Francesca Fiorentini will be joining me. John Idarola is out today. Also wanted to give a special shout out to Progressive B, who gifted a tier 1 sub on Twitch. Thank you so much. Same to Dragon Mage Queen, who also gifted a tier 1 sub. We really, really appreciate you guys. Thank you for doing that. And finally, Psych Dragon has subscribed for 25 months on Twitch. And the comment is, save this till I could share it with you, our Salt Queen. Keep up the hard work, you're making a difference. I hope that's true. In the very least, I hope I'm giving you guys some information that's hard to come by in legacy media outlets. With that said though, I'm gonna cover something that's a little different in the first hour. It has to do with Chelsea Handler, and I just love this story. Any opportunity to talk about what it's like to be a parent in this country, great. Whether she knew it or not, Chelsea Handler trolled the right wing pretty hard with a video that she made for The Daily Show titled "A Day in the Life of a Childless Woman." Now, the sketch is readily available online. I highly suggest you watch it. It's clearly meant to note preposterous things that she allegedly does as a childless woman. But the best part about it was the conservative reaction to it, which we'll get to in a moment. You don't want to miss that. First, let me give you some more details about what she says in the video. So in the very beginning, she says that she wakes up in the morning. She's like, I wake up at 6 a.m. I remember that I have no kids to take to school. So I take an edible, masturbate, and go back to sleep. Which is pretty hilarious and sounds like a good time. Now later in the video, she describes more outlandish things that she obviously doesn't do. But again, it's a sketch. It's meant to be funny. It's meant to be fun. She's like, I go to my favorite spot in Paris and grab a croissant. Then she says, the weightlessness of my existence has granted me superhuman powers. Okay, obviously that's not true. It's just meant to be fun. And then she says, I teleport myself back home, then I get ready for a night out with whatever hot guy I met on Raya that morning, or Raya. Now it's time for a workout, so I hit Mount Everest for a quick climb. And then later she says, I invented a time machine to go back in time and kill Hitler. So again, the video is fun, it's meant to be funny. I thought it was hilarious, but conservatives lost it. Because for some reason, they care deeply about whether or not we're procreating. And for some reason, they are hell-bent on putting out into the world that childless mothers are the most miserable people on the planet. Okay, look, I can't speak for all women, obviously. I can't speak for all women who have not had children. I do not have children, and I love it. I love it for a lot of different reasons. Living in America and seeing all of the threats and risks to kids, like for instance, the weirdo parents that would show up at school board meetings or would show up on campuses and harass children who wanted to wear masks. Like, I would murder someone. I don't want to go to prison. You get what I'm saying? It's all about knowing yourself and knowing whether or not you would be a good parent. I'd be a good parent, but my rage at anyone who even slightly offended my kid would be pretty devastating for my life and possibly the life of the person who offended my kid. But anyway, with that said, why don't we first go to Tucker Carlson's conversation about this with his co-chud, some guy named Jesse.
That's what you see women like Chelsea Handler, feminists like Chelsea Handler going with now. They've been lied to by their society forever. That you could be a girl boss and you could do anything a man can do, which everyone who's ever seen a woman back up a vehicle knows that's not true. But either way, they've been told that they should do career and don't do a family or anything like that. And soon you're Chelsea Handler. Soon it's Valentine's Day and your womb resembles a dried up tumbleweed blowing down an old Western town. And your Valentine's Day date for the 10th year in a row is a 10-year-old copy of Magic Mike and a half-full bottle of Xanax, and you're trying to pretend like you're happy, but you're not happy. And it's actually not her fault. She's been lied to by a country that has lost its way.
How do you know she's not happy? Like, I could just say that about you. I mean, that guy looks miserable. Like, why do you think that she's drinking bottles of wine and guzzling down half bottles of Xanax? Like, just completely made up, completely made up. But also, look, this is the most important point that I want you to really absorb as we continue giving you more details about this. Why do you care? Like, why do they care? Why are they so hell-bent on ensuring that Chelsea Handler's miserable? And why do they care about her decision to not have kids? I don't even care. I have difficulty caring enough about my own friends having kids. Why would I care about a complete stranger and whether or not they're having kids? Who cares? Who cares? But there's more. There's Matt Walsh, who says nothing more pathetic than the coping done by a childless woman pushing 50. She could have had kids and still be doing basically whatever she wants with her life today. That's not true. Kids aren't toddlers forever. She could have her freedom and a family. Instead, she'll die alone. You know, there's a lot of commentary coming from men on this issue. But fact of the matter is, having a child when you have a wonderful, supportive husband is still incredibly challenging, okay? Having a child with a typical husband who isn't gonna come home after a long day of work to do the cooking, to do the cleaning, to do the diaper changes and all that stuff, that's torture. So the idea that like, you could pop out all these babies and still have it all. I mean, they're not toddlers forever. You're right, they're not toddlers forever. Later, they end up going to school. You gotta figure out whether or not the public school in your neighborhood has been defunded to the point where it's just untenable to send your kid there. So then you gotta do lottery programs to see if some charter school will take your kid. If that doesn't work, you gotta consider maybe $25,000 for a private school. Yeah, you're right, they're not toddlers forever. After that, they go through their teen years. I don't know how old Matt Walsh's kids are, but I can't wait for him to experience that. I was a teen once, I remember what I was like. No, having kids is incredibly difficult. And for once, finally, in this country, parents are being honest about it. And I love that they're being honest about it. They're being honest about the postpartum depression. They're being honest with the medical bills associated with maternity and childbirth. They're being honest about how incredibly hard it is to be a woman who's working toward career objectives, career goals, while raising babies. It is hard, and it's especially hard in a country that provides absolutely no support. We'll get to that in a moment. But more comments. Oh, Raya Raychick, whatever her name is, Libs of TikTok woman, says, this is one of the saddest videos I've ever seen. Really? That's one of the saddest videos you've ever seen? I mean, we're inundated with awful video content on a daily basis, but a comedic video featuring Chelsea Handler celebrating the fact that she made the right decision for her is the saddest video you've ever seen? Okay. Ben Shapiro, the best thing about this video is that it features her explaining that she can do whatever she wants as a person with no kids. And so she names a bunch of stuff she didn't do because her actual life consists of drinking a bunch of wine and being really, really sad. But how do you know that, Ben? And yeah, she listed things that she didn't actually do because it was meant to be a sketch. It's just a funny video. But we should talk a little bit about what it's like to be a parent in America who doesn't work at a company that can offer a talentless chud like Steven Crowder a $50 million contract, okay? Because most people don't live in that economic situation. Most Americans don't even, 40% of Americans have an income that's so low that they pay nothing in federal taxes. I mean, the inequality might have something to do with the fact that people are deciding, nah, having kids isn't for me because they can't afford it. There's no social safety net. There's no support at all, especially when you compare the United States, which is supposed to be the greatest country in the world, to other developed countries. And we're gonna do that right now. First off, fun headline. This is from Slate. And I just really love the choice stock imagery utilized for the story. Surprise, surprise, American parents are the least happy parents in the Western world. How much do you love that stock image? It's great, okay. So here's another one from Time. Many parents are happier than non-parents, but not in the United States. And that story had to do with a study that looked at the life satisfaction of 22 Western countries. And they did in fact find that in some parts of the world, parents are actually happier than non-parents. That's not the case in the United States though. Let me give you the details. A Council of Contemporary Families briefing paper based on a longer peer-reviewed report argues that parental discontent is neither global nor inevitable, but in some countries, humans with offspring actually report higher levels of well-being than those without. Now, the researcher here says our results indicate that the parental happiness penalty varies substantially from country to country. In fact, in some countries such as, oh wow, what a surprise, Norway and Hungary, parents are actually happier than non-parents. That's also true on average of parents in such places as Portugal, Finland, Sweden, and Spain. What do those countries tend to have that the United States doesn't have? At the very bottom of the list of the 22 countries is the United States, because this is the country, based on this study, where parents are likely to be less happy than non-parents, okay? Now, of the 22 countries the researchers studied, America has the biggest happiness differential between parents and the child-free, meaning that parents are miserable and people who actually decide to not have kids tend to be happier, on average. That's not the case for everyone. Again, if you have certain resources, if you have certain support, might be different, might be easier to raise a kid. But for the vast majority of Americans, no, it is not easy to raise children in this country. In fact, most Americans just do not have the resources to do so, right? The resources to provide the childcare so they can go back to work. And please spare me the BS argument about like, oh, the mom should stay home. The mother should stay home. Yeah, except she can't. You need a dual income household to provide for that family. That's the economy we're living in. Let's acknowledge that. Let's get out of our multi-million-dollar bubble and acknowledge what the vast majority of Americans are dealing with. If you care so much, and by the way, I don't care if people want to have kids or not, at all, okay? You do you, I do me, okay? I want to live my life. I don't want anyone involved in my personal, intimate decisions. I don't want the government involved. I don't want people at the Daily Wire involved. None of your goddamn business. But since they seem to care so much about why people decide to forego having children, I'm just giving you the information you somehow missed while living in this country, okay? So it can be largely attributed, going back to that study and how the United States is at the bottom of the list when it comes to happiness after having children. It can be largely attributed, says lead author Jennifer Glass, a sociologist at the University of Texas, Austin, to the average cost of childcare for a 2-year-old and the number of paid vacation and sick days people can take a year. In the US, the former is way too high and the latter way too low. Unlike its economically developed counterparts, the United States has done little to offset the costs of raising children and ameliorate the incompatibility between employment and childcare, the study says. And I'm sorry if I'm preaching to the choir. It's just that there's a handful of folks who don't understand this and they need to know. The negative effects of parenthood on happiness were entirely explained by the presence or absence of social policies allowing parents to better combine paid work with family obligations. And this was true for both mothers and fathers. Countries with better family policy packages had no happiness gap between parents and non-parents. None of this should be surprising, folks. And by the way, how much does it cost to raise a child in the United States from age 7 to age 18? It's a lot. And when you compare it to Finland, it'll blow your mind. So why don't we start with Finland? Because Finland was one of the top countries when it came to happy parents. And it's easy to understand why when you see the amount of support Finnish parents tend to get. Let's watch.
Finland's healthcare system has helped give it the lowest maternal death rate in the world. And it's available here to everyone for next to nothing. Dr. Aiden Tekai is the chief physician on the labour ward. Every mother here gets a private room and even the option of a water birth.
100 euros you will pay, and of that you will get almost 50% back as a reimbursement.
That's under $60 to have a baby, compared with the US, where the average natural birth costs over $12,000, and insurance doesn't cover all of it. The maternal death rate in the US has nearly doubled over the last 3 decades. In Finland, they've cut it in half. And the government also wants parents to spend time with their babies. In Finland, you're guaranteed around 4 months paid maternity leave by law, and parents can then split another 6 months paid parental leave, though not at the same time.
4 months mandatory paid leave. I mean, minimum, that's the minimum. You get more time after that you split with your partner. I mean, and when you look at the maternal mortality rate in the United States compared to countries like Finland, I mean, we're not just talking about making the decision easier for Americans. We're also talking about saving lives when we discuss the importance of these social programs. Now let's compare that to what it's like to be a parent in the United States.
If we had had 2 kids in full-time daycare, it would have been a lot more than rent. So that's why it absolutely wasn't an option. And when we looked at the numbers for full-time nannies in the San Francisco area, they all charge about 80 grand a year.
The average family with at least 1 child under the age of 5 typically spends around 13% of the family's income on childcare, according to a September 2021 Treasury Department report. That's about 1 out of every $8. That's more than what the average household spends on groceries, and nearly double what the government considers affordable for low-income families.
That sounds like a tough time to me. And it has been a tough time for many parents, especially during the pandemic, as mothers had an incredibly difficult time going back to work because they couldn't afford childcare for their kids. I mean, the cost of childcare has blown up. In fact, let's go to graphic 16 here. Childcare costs have actually outpaced inflation. In 2020, for instance, childcare expenses rose 5.03% year over year compared to the annual inflation rate of just 1.2% at the time. And it continues to go up. The Build Back Better agenda that Biden barely fought for included funding for childcare. It would have alleviated some of this financial burden for parents, but Republicans fought it tooth and nail because I don't know, do they want people to have kids? Because it doesn't seem like it. They certainly don't want to offer any support. And one other thing I want to mention is the cost of raising kids also goes up and seems to be outpacing inflation as well. The US Department of Agriculture published a report using 2015 data that estimated child rearing expenses from birth through age 17 in a 2-child middle-income married couple family is $233,610. So from birth through age 17, meaning it doesn't even take into account the cost of college. And look, maybe all these conservative public figures had the kind of reaction they did because Chelsea Handler is who Chelsea Handler is. Maybe they see a liberal woman and they're like, we gotta pounce. But you know, it seems like Dennis Prager, who's no liberal, seems to agree with her. Let's watch.
I have zero romanticization of children. Children are among the meanest creatures on earth. How you make a child into a good adult is the single most important question any society can ask. essentially there's no close second. Because we don't start off all that wonderful.
Well, Dennis, when it comes to you, you didn't end up all that wonderful either. But hey, hands off the Dennis Prager. Let's attack Chelsea Handler for allegedly being miserable for making a decision that was right for her. And in the meantime, you want people to have babies? You want Americans to feel comfortable starting families? How about you stop gutting what's left of our social safety net? And maybe people feel like their financial situation is stable enough to start that family. In the meantime, I don't want to hear a damn thing from conservatives who laugh at the notion of paid family leave. Because they're not helping, they're just hurting anyone who actually wants to start a family. All right, we gotta take a break. When we come back, Francesca Fiorentini will be joining me for hour 2.
Ice cream.
The rest of the news media says you should not fight for positive change. If you do, you're not really a reporter or a journalist, because reporters and journalists don't care what happens. I don't agree. That's not written anywhere, that's not a law. It's just a rule that they invented so that reporters didn't actually challenge the people that are in power. Well, we don't agree with that. We think we should challenge the people in power, that actually makes you a better journalist, not a worse one.
Here at the Young Turks, we do our best to bring you the most essential news stories of the day, but we can't cover everything in a 2-hour show. And for the rest, I recommend Ground News. Founded by a former NASA scientist, Ground News uses a revolutionary system that analyzes where the news is coming from and gives you complete transparency on the potential biases these sources may have. That way, you can read between the lines of media bias and break free from the corporate media agenda. In arming you with the context and transparency, you'll have everything you need to think critically about the news and build responsible media literacy for yourself and others. With Ground News, you're not just mindlessly consuming the media, you're part of a movement that is working to hold them accountable and get straight to the facts. Break through the filter bubbles, the propaganda, and the bias, and subscribe to Ground News today.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to Greene with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
I got pulled in, they told me, hey, listen, Cenk, we're insiders. We are the establishment. People in Washington tell me that they're concerned about your tone. We think that there's a better role for you, and it's not in 6 o'clock. The problem with the mainstream media is they're desperate to get access. They don't challenge the government. They don't challenge power. We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media.
Components that corrupt our politicians, I think, also corrupt mainstream media. It's really difficult for cable outlets to talk about things like income inequality, wealth inequality, when the advertisers that are funding their shows are the same corporations that want to ensure that the same system continues. People watch digital media or new media, they get a completely different message. They focus on the issues that matter or resonate more with the constituency. We need to know one thing. Is the corporate media incompetent?
Corporate media, I can't hear you. Establishment press, where are you? I can't hear you. But the media's position I am clear on. Everything is pro-war, so everything is just framed that way. In this case, I mean, war is inevitable, right? I mean, the defense contractors should get a couple more $1 trillion. You ready for the stunning results? Only 6% of people say they have a great deal of confidence in the press. Wakey, wakey, okay? Progressives don't like the media either. You know why? It's the corporate media. Corporate media sounds like a conspiracy. Wait. Who owns you? Multi-billion-dollar corporations, public corporations. The idea that we're corporate media because corporations own us. Yeah, that's how it works. We found the perfect person to lead the army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian and Francesca Fiorentini with you. Franny Fio, it's been a while since we've done a show together.
Oh my God, too long, Anna. Way too long. I used to have a show before this called The Twitchuation Room on Twitch, but that's okay. I've ceded that hour by the grace of me to JR Jackson, but I'm happy to be here with you.
I'm super happy that you're here. And you still have the other show, your main squeeze, the Bitchuation Room.
The main squeeze. Yeah, the podcast, Bitchuation Room. Everyone, listen, check it out at Franny Fio on all the platforms. But for now, super excited to jump into a juicy hour and change.
Absolutely. All right, well, unfortunately, we're gonna start with a pretty heartbreaking story. It is an update on the trial of the Buffalo shooter. So with that said, why don't we get to it?
You gonna come to our city and decide you don't like black people. Man, you don't know a damn thing about black people. We're human. We like our kids to go to good schools. We love our kids. We never go in those neighborhoods and take people out. Don't do it.
That was the scene at the New York courtroom today during the sentencing hearing for 19-year-old Peyton Gendron, who was, of course, the racist shooter who murdered 10 black people at a grocery store in Buffalo last May. Now, the woman speaking was Barbara Massey, I should say, whose sister, 72-year-old Catherine Massey, was killed in that mass shooting. Now, the man who charged at the murderer hasn't been identified, but is believed to be a family member of a victim. Erie County Court Judge Susan Egan temporarily halted the hearing and called for order in the court. She said this, quote, I'm sure you all are disturbed by the physicality we've seen today. I understand the emotion and I understand the anger, but we cannot have that in the courtroom. We must conduct ourselves appropriately because we are all better than that. So they went on recess, and after that, Erie County District Attorney John Flynn said that the man who charged at Gendron will not face any charges for doing so, which I'm happy to hear about because he shouldn't face any charges. After the brief recess, other victims also testified, including Christopher Braden, who was shot in the leg during that massacre. He said that the massacre left him with post-traumatic stress disorder, which is completely understandable. He's also had 4 surgeries and still has 2 more surgeries to do. And he told Gendron during the hearing, quote, your actions completely changed my life. I have night terrors that jerk me awake in the middle of the night. It takes me 15 minutes to get out of bed. And Simone Crawley, the granddaughter of 86-year-old Ruth Whitfield, the oldest victim who was killed during the rampage, said this: you clearly did not value your own life, which allowed you to devalue the lives of others. Even with all the heartache you caused, you have failed to break our family's spirit. You thought you broke us, but you awoke us. We all know the pure hatred and motivations behind your heinous crime, and we are here to tell you that you failed. And Gendron himself made a statement as well, which we'll get to in just a moment. I should note that he has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And Francesca, I want to hear your thoughts on it. The thoughts on how all of this transpired, the sentence, do you feel the sentence is good? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I do not believe in the death penalty. I don't believe the state should be in the business of killing people in response to the killing of other people. At the same time, I gotta say, every bone in my body wants to see Gendron get the daylights beat out of him by that victim's family member. I'm sorry, I say, let him have it, let him at it. Like, just let him go. Why not, right? He deserves it. He absolutely deserves it. And it does feel a little bit stinging and ironic that the judge would say, we're better than that, and like, you're like, but are we actually? And when people can be gunned down while they're grocery shopping, people's grandmothers, 86-year-old grandmothers, 72-year-old mothers, are we better than that? So one thing I wanna note is that feels like there was a reason that gentleman charged at Gendron. He's standing there quietly. he's listening to his, I believe, family member speak very impassioned about, we are human. How can I get that through your thick racist skull? And something happens, and there's maybe a facial expression. There's something that triggers that gentleman to lunge the way he did, because he was calm. But imagine that was your relative who is dead, and you have to face their murderer, and the murderer maybe winks, does a little cringe, does a little licks their lips even. I don't know what. It would set me off. It would absolutely set me off. Something happened.
Listen, no one in my family was victimized by that massacre, and I would want to charge at him. So it's the most understandable thing imaginable. And he did speak during this hearing, and he apparently apologized for what he did. I actually couldn't stomach watching this video, so it's gonna be the first time I watch it. But here it is. Let's see if it's convincing.
I'm very sorry for all the pain I forced the victims and their families to suffer through. I'm very sorry for stealing the lives of your loved ones. I cannot express how much I regret all the decisions I made leading up to my actions on May 14th. I did a terrible thing that day. I shot and killed people because they were black. Looking back now, I can't believe I actually did it. I believed what I read online and acted out of hate. I know I can't take it back, but I wish I could. And I don't want anyone to be inspired by me and what I did.
I mean, if I were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after gunning down 10 black people at a supermarket because of this race-based motivation, and remember, he was a believer or is a believer of white replacement theory. Yeah, I would probably be regretful, remorseful, because I wouldn't want to go to prison for the rest of my life. But I think that's where he belongs. I don't see this guy as someone who could ever, Francesca, when I mention, are you happy with the sentence? I'm against the death penalty as well, right? But I know that there's some hesitancy to say that people should deal with these lengthy prison sentences. I have no qualms about this guy rotting in prison for the rest of his life. Zero. That is where he belongs. He robbed 10 people of their lives. I don't know if someone like that could ever be rehabilitated. I don't really care to find out. I think he should rot in prison for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can completely understand that. I don't know if I'm as convinced that he should do that, because I feel like we have not seen life sentences actually work. Yes, they prevent that one particular person from killing again. Sure.
Good enough.
But it's not clear. Right, but it's not clear, Anna, that other 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, I mean, this guy has his entire life ahead of him. It's not clear that we are doing the work on all kinds of levels, whether it's on the internet, whether it's in our communities, whether it is in fighting hate in schools. Clearly, we're running in the completely opposite direction. If you follow Florida, we are not doing the work to make sure that we don't create the kinds of white supremacist, murderous, ideologically driven little boys that this guy clearly is. This is not a 40-year-old man who's like lived his life and like understands things, knows the consequences. This dude's frontal cortex or whatever the hell, it's still developing. I'm saying I do have a shred of empathy for the fact that he fell down this rabbit hole, and that there are tons of honestly like demonic racists out there just waiting to radicalize young white men into thinking that they somehow are the victim. They're being, replaced. Here's an AR-15. Oh, that's super easy. That's like the easiest part of this whole equation. Let's not even talk about that. So I hear what you're saying. Obviously, if you're a family member, I go by what their wishes are. But if that life sentence doesn't also involve some kind of active work to combat this kind of hate, then I feel like we're just doomed to repeat this.
No, I agree with you on that. I agree with you on that. I mean, I believe he belongs in prison for the rest of his life. But I do also think that we need to address how people get radicalized, and more importantly, the conditions in which people are most vulnerable to being radicalized. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I totally agree with you on that. But my heart breaks for these family members. I didn't feel at all judgmental about the emotions they were expressing during this hearing. And the judge finally, Erie County Judge Susan Egan, says this: there is no place for you, and of course she's talking to the perpetrator here, for you or your ignorant, hateful, and evil ideologies in a civilized society. There can be no mercy for you, no understanding, no second chances. The damage you have caused is too great, and the people you have hurt are too valuable to this community. You will never see the light of day as a free man ever again.
Yeah. I guess I just want to ask you, Anna, because I do think there's an apt comparison here, right? Which is, I'm thinking of another 17-year-old who killed people, Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah.
Yes, the contours of who he killed and how he killed them were different, but not that different. You can imagine if Gendron had gone to a Black Lives Matter protest armed with an AR-15 and someone tried to disarm him and then he shot himself. These are fine lines, and yet you have one who is sentenced for life, rightfully so, for the murder of 13 people, and another who is trotted out in front of what, CPAC, lauded. I don't know, maybe he's got his own cryptocurrency at this point. Like he's on TikTok, like he's a star.
Yeah, look,
there's not that much difference here.
I think there is though, Francesca, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy who showed up at a grocery store, had a racist manifesto about white replacement theory, and went in there specifically to gun people down, to slaughter people at that grocery store. Kyle Rittenhouse should not have been at that protest, okay? I'm 100% against him being there, showing up with his weapon proudly displayed. It was meant to provoke. And unfortunately, the reason why he got off and this mass shooter didn't is because in the split second where he was being disarmed or attacked, he genuinely thought his life was in danger and he opened fire, and that was convincing to the jury. He shouldn't have been there, but it is different, and I think we got to be honest about that.
No, it is different. However, I do think that the ideologies that drive them are similar.
That's a fair point.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's definitely
the number of dead. The context is incredibly different, but the ideology is similar. And look at the gulf between. No one's gonna laud Gendron, at least not in public company and in polite Republican company, but they will do it for Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we've seen that. I mean, people willing to shell out literally millions of dollars to bail Rittenhouse out. I mean, that was clear. Anyway, we do have to take a break. When we come back, we've got more news to get to, including what the DOJ is doing in response to gun violence in America. Is it enough? Spoiler alert, no, but you should learn about what they're doing. And then later, workers at Tesla are looking to unionize. We'll talk about that and what is likely to happen with Elon Musk's reaction. Come right back.
Ice cream.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Let's go to our super chats. Danny Wyndham says this about Social Security and whether or not it'll ever be insolvent. Social Security will never, ever become insolvent. It's impossible. And then he says, taxes don't fund Social Security. The government funds Social Security, a government that can't run out of money. That is not true. Our taxes, payroll taxes, and the taxes that we pay in every single paycheck we get does in fact go towards Social Security. Listen, I'm not a proponent of this like new monetary theory that thinks like, oh no, deficits are no problem, debt is no problem. I'm not buying that. I don't find that argument persuasive at all. So I'm just gonna put that out there. Maybe we can talk about it in more detail later, but our taxes do in fact fund Social Security, which is part of the reason why the rich hate it. So Meredith Putvin says, I see a man on Xanax himself, referring to that Jesse guy who was on Tucker's show. Mr. Brief says, the reason they are so invested in having kids is one of the only effective ways of propagating their religion and bad politics. I mean, look, I think they're also thinking about a workforce, that they need the workforce for the economy to function properly. So I think they're concerned about that too. But if you want Americans to have kids, to make the decision to have kids, how about create a country that's actually supportive of families who are looking to start having kids? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's real easy to just insult women or couples who decide not to have children. But why don't you actually listen to what they have to say about their decision not to? It's really hard to be a parent in America. In fact, I want to read a comment from Zoltan Hall, who says, I changed careers to be home with our twin boys, now 10 years old. They have never been in daycare, which is extremely expensive. Parenting is hard. It's 24/7 plus extra hours on top. Why would you force someone to have a child they don't want or can't afford? No, you're right about that. And look, Francesca just had a baby, and I don't know if like the challenges have set in yet, Francesca, but it's hard.
They set in real quick. They set in immediately. But yeah, I love that story. I just love the public freak out. Like, she's trolling you guys. She's trolling.
It's amazing.
She lives her life. She skis topless high. It's great. Let her live her life.
Look, even if I was a strong proponent of having kids, I still wouldn't care. Who cares? Let people make decisions for themselves. Like, what, really? We're gonna start judging people for their personal decision? I don't know, it's crazy.
But they believe in freedom, Anna. It's all about freedom and independence. Sure.
And she must be so unhappy. That's the other thing that really stood out to me. How obsessed they are with ensuring that she's unhappy with her decision when she seems like she's doing okay. She's fine. Brad David says, I agree we need stricter gun laws, but unless we address the problem of young men feeling lonely, we are not going to get anywhere. I agree with you on that as well. Look, that's definitely part of it. We did a story yesterday focusing on adolescent girls and how prevalent depression is among them as well. We definitely have a crisis, and we're gonna keep talking about that. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian and Francesca Fiorentini with you. Make sure you check out everything Fran does. Yes, she's on TYT Network shows regularly, but she also has her own podcast, The Bituation Room. Francesca, where can people find your podcast?
It's on the TYT Network podcast lineup, so you can totally find it there on all podcast platforms. Bituation Room. It's also on YouTube at Franny Fio, streaming live every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And also, I just joined Rebel HQ, so weekly videos from your girl. Excited to be part of that team.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, everyone, go check out Francesca's work. Let's also talk a little bit about what the Department of Justice is doing in response to gun violence in America. The DOJ has announced that it is spending $231 million on bolstering red flag laws that would temporarily take guns away from individuals who have been deemed violent or a threat. Now, 19 states and the District of Columbia have red flag laws. It's just that even though they've passed legislation, they haven't really implemented it to the extent that they could. So the DOJ's thinking here is maybe the funding will help them actually carry out the policies that they've already voted in favor of. Now, some of the $231 million in funding will also go to crisis intervention court proceedings and other gun violence reduction programs. I just want to note that in a country that is swimming in guns, $231 million does not sound like a lot of money, especially when it's supposed to both help support the red flag laws and also fund some of these other gun violence reduction programs. But I don't know. I mean, we hear all these figures thrown around, billions and billions of dollars for this. I mean, military funding is over $800 billion at this point every year, and it continues to go up every year. But Francesca, so far, what do you think about what the DOJ is doing here?
You're absolutely right. It's a drop in the bucket, but at least it's a start. It's saying we're not gonna sit around and wait for Congress. We're gonna actually see the tools at our disposal and get going, get to work. I am very curious how this is going to play out. Does it mean, little ad campaigns on the back of bathroom stalls, which is something, but will it also involve protecting people who might actually call in someone who they believe is violent, or combing police databases and records to make sure that this person doesn't have a domestic violence charge? I know that red flag laws would not have prevented a lot of the mass shootings we have seen, especially those done by, again, kids who just aged into the AR-15 eligible bracket. But it absolutely will cut down on things like, again, domestic violence disputes that often end in femicide, for lack of a better term. That is the term, killing of a partner.
Yeah, in fact, I'm gonna skip ahead since you referenced that, because it's a really, really important point to emphasize here. So unfortunately, even if you elect the right lawmakers, even if the party that you think is gonna do the best job with gun control is in power, we still have a huge problem with right-wing judges who seem to be more concerned with activism than doing what's right in protecting Americans. So unfortunately, a federal appeals court has decided to strike down a domestic violence gun law. The US Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled the government can't stop people who have domestic violence restraining orders filed against them from owning guns. I mean, Jesus. So it gives you a sense of how you have this entire political system, complete with the judiciary, that will provide cover for the insane laxed gun laws that we have in this country. But let's get back to what the DOJ is doing. I mentioned the $231 million. That's all part of a $1.4 billion piece of legislation provided to the Justice Department over 5 years for gun violence prevention, okay? So it's part of a larger piece of legislation that has more appropriated for this, which is a good sign. It's a good start, but obviously we need more. The funding will be given for the creation and implementation of risk protection programs that would allow family members, schools, law enforcement, and healthcare providers to petition a court to temporarily prevent a person from accessing firearms if they are deemed to be a danger to themselves or others. One other thing I wanted to just quickly mention to you, Francesca, or actually ask you about, because I've been thinking about this a lot. So it really depends on how the red flag laws are written, and it's gonna vary from state to state. What I'm concerned about is personal biases. And so if we have gun rights in this country, the gun rights should apply to everyone equally, right? If you have certain elements of government, like law enforcement, for instance, involved in actually implementing these red flag laws, could personal biases play a role in who they determine to be a threat in confiscating guns? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, in terms of like disarming like communities of color, going after Black Americans. I mean, the Philando Castile, those who had licenses to carry and were murdered anyway. Yeah, I mean, to say nothing of the fact that if the cops are the ones implementing this, they don't have a great record themselves when it comes to, being a little trigger happy, as it were. But yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it means that there needs to be an arbiter for gun violence that isn't the cops, right? Like, what is the force? What is the body? And honestly, I also think the body that will protect those who call in their family members. Again, this is what I'm saying. If you say, look, I know my uncle, he's armed to the teeth, he's crazy, I don't want him to do anything. But also, if you are petitioning for a red flag law to be, or a red flag, I guess, strike or something to be placed on that person can never find out that it was you who called that in, because what could happen? You could die, right? That puts you in harm's way. So I think that's a great point on who it's going to be applied to equally. And a lot of these things, it's never applied equally. And the last thing I'm gonna say is give people money. Like gun buyback programs. I know we love to talk, or the right loves to be like, Venezuela. No, it's countries like Venezuela, which is rife with also gun violence and gun ownership. They do gun buybacks. I know we have that on a local level and statewide levels. There's sort of fits and starts of gun buybacks. I say give people money to turn in their guns, give people money to also, if they not turn in their relatives, but if they flag somebody who could be dangerous, they should be rewarded for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. As my dad likes to say, Anahi, the cash is talking. He means to say money talks, but you know, yeah, no, I mean, a financial incentive, I think, is going to be far more persuasive than anything else. So I would like to see some money appropriated for that as well. And we've seen in the past how gun buyback programs, not just in this country, but in other countries, have been pretty successful. But you know, this is a start. It's something, and it's more than what we've seen for decades now when it comes to any action on common sense gun control. So we'll see if it makes any impact, but for now, we'll go ahead and move on to Tesla, because the workers there are looking to unionize, and I can't wait to see how Elon Musk is going to respond to this. Well, it's not that I can't wait, just that I know he's not gonna like it, and he's probably gonna try to crush these efforts. Now, Tesla factory workers in Buffalo, New York have announced yesterday that they're campaigning to form a union. Unfortunately, it's not going to be an easy task, considering their chief executive, Elon Musk, is very much against labor organizing. But let's talk about what the plan is, what they would like to see changed at this Tesla factory, and then we'll go from there. Now, the effort is being led by the company's autopilot analysts, who helped to develop the autopilot technology in the vehicles. Now, the autopilot analysts also hope to unionize the other manufacturing workers at the Buffalo or Tesla factory. Now, like other workers who decide to organize, they have issues with pay, but they also have issues with working conditions. So according to Bloomberg, these analysts are hired at a starting pay of around $19 an hour, which seems pretty low considering how successful Tesla is, how expensive the vehicles are, and how much work these people put in every single day. I mean, they're working incredibly long hours. And by the way, they receive very little sick time. One of the workers, Zara, says, "As much as I love my job, it can feel very disheartening living paycheck to paycheck when I work for one of the most successful companies in the world. And that is why I'm exercising my right to unionize." And Francesca, I will say, now is the time to do it, because the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, under the Biden administration, has been relatively good. And I'm saying relative because other administrations have had pretty abysmal National Labor Relations Boards. But in this case, you know, they have stepped in to protect some of the workers from Starbucks, for instance, after they were retaliated against for wanting to organize their workplace. So more power to these workers at Tesla. I hope they go forward with it.
Oh yeah, I think it's incredible. And it also is not a big morale boost when the head of Tesla, Elon Musk, is off like running his mouth on Twitter, whining constantly about how, you know, his tweets, no one's engaging with them. Now you must change algorithm. Like, he is a terrible figurehead for this company. And I think shareholders think that, and now you see workers think that. So it's not only, it's all of it at once, right? You see your own CEO clearly just wasting money left and right, buying up companies over, like, for way more than they're worth, gallivanting over to the Super Bowl to chill with Rupert Murdoch. Hell yeah, you're gonna unionize. And $19 an hour is nothing.
Insane.
Are you kidding me? And finally, look, that is a very particular subsect of Tesla workers. These are the people who are keenly aware of how your autopilot does and does not work. And we have seen the crashes on the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. We've seen people like these pileups caused by a Tesla that was on autopilot. We've seen remember the dude who used to work at Tesla, his job was to take him for test drives. He posted videos to YouTube. He was fired for that, even though Elon Musk knew he was doing that. So all of these things, this is a group of workers you want to keep happy.
Yes.
They got the dirt on how bad your autopilot function actually is, and how far we are truly from self-driving cars. Don't at me about that. You know we're far.
Yeah, no,
so
you're totally right about that. I just wanted to really reinforce what you just said, because, you know, the Elon Musk fanboys are totally like oblivious to what's really going on with these vehicles and how they're not in any way ready to be, you know, driverless. But the other thing I wanted to just quickly mention is not only do you want to keep them happy, you want to avoid overworking them, especially considering this is the feature that's really a selling point for Elon Musk's cars, right? So give them some time off. The fact that they can't take time off is insane.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And also I think it goes to this idea that we have in this country of like prestigious brands. Tesla's sort of seen as, it's a status symbol, right? You own a Tesla, status symbol, right? And yet it also is like an electric car, right? So it's a status symbol of sort of elite liberal, ideology. And those are also the libs that do not want to be supporting a brand that is crappy to its workers. I mean, the give or take, I'm not saying every Tesla owner, but ultimately, I think a lot of it does not behoove the brand overall, which is really appealing to that base when they know that you treat your workers like crap.
Absolutely. And one other thing I'll mention in regard to how the workers are treated, there's all sorts of insane surveillance and monitoring happening. So workers at the plant told Bloomberg that Tesla, like other corporations, unfortunately, monitors keystrokes to track how long employees spend per task and how much of the day they spend actively working. This leads some to avoid taking bathroom breaks, 6 employees said. People are tired of being treated like robots, said Al Selly, a member of the union's organizing committee. I don't understand that obsession that corporate executives have, okay? There's a workload, and the employee has to get the work done by a certain deadline. Why are you surveilling them all day? Like, I just don't get that. It's so stupid, and it creates this, it's communicating to your employees that you don't trust them, that you think they're lazy losers and you have to constantly like watch them like a weirdo. Like, yes. That's not going to help your situation. It's crazy.
No, not at all. I mean, and it's become so much more commonplace now with the pandemic. Like people who, again, are making as little as 19 an hour, like, we gotta monitor their keystrokes. Stop it, stop. And it's a fight. I love it. I love that it's a fight. And I love that we get to troll Elon Musk when this union goes forward and we get to be on the side of the workers once again and rub it in his face. So yeah.
It is pretty delicious.
I'm looking forward to the fight.
Yeah, and he is notoriously anti-union. So I can't wait to hear his comment on this, but I hope it doesn't deter the workers. They should continue organizing, they should continue fighting because they deserve protection and they deserve better working conditions and pay. It's that easy, that simple. We gotta take a break. When we come back, the New York Times is urging us to have more sex. I'll tell you why, don't miss it.
Live sex.
Welcome back to the social break. There's so many great comments. I'm gonna go back to our members section where Swamp G Dragon says, I love you, Anna. That's it. I mean, I could stop reading right there. Perfect, perfect comment. My husband and I have been married for 27 years. We chose not to have children due to a chronic medical condition I was diagnosed with at the age of 26. Most of my friends that did have children are kind of miserable and are kind of jealous of us for the fact that we did not have children. Look, I've seen parents who are super happy as parents, right? Like it is challenging, but then they also say it's one of the most rewarding parts of their lives. I do often, like the one area where I get a little bit nervous is I love family. Like I love spending time with my family. I visit my parents every Sunday. I do worry like one day when they're gone, right? That I'm gonna feel lonely or the holidays might be a little tough, but I don't know, I haven't felt that yet. I mean, I feel like things are great. I'm loving my life. And at the end of the day, I know what's right for me. And I don't want anyone else telling me what I should do with my personal life, you know?
I just think also we have to like de-escalate on both sides of this debate. Yeah. It's not that big of a deal. Jessica Valenti is a great writer, feminist writer for The Guardian, always is like, yeah, I had a kid. And I don't make a giant deal of it, and it's totally fine if you don't want to have a kid.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Like it is, I just had a kid. Look, guys, it is like a full-time job that you both dread but also love. It's like the dream job that you're like, oh God, but I gotta get up at 6 a.m. That's what it is. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we just have to just not pass judgment about other people's decisions.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, let me do some live reads. Why don't I? Let's go to the watch list. So for those of you who are tuning into the watch list in its original time, don't do that because it has moved to 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. You can watch the watch list with JR Jackson on weekdays. Again, at 5 p.m. Eastern at tyt.com/live. Also, progress report, the big corporate newsletters all want you to believe that they've got the inside story, but they're wrong. The progress report brings you something even better, insight. And no, we don't barrage you with every obsessive development from Trump world, just what truly matters. And no, we don't light the world on fire over every fringe outrage, just what truly matters. So if you want to read the progress report, please sign up by going to tyt.com/newsletter, or you can go ahead and scan that QR code. Happy Half Hour also airs after our bonus episode today, so make sure you check that out at twitch.tv/TYT. Good news and good booze, don't miss it. All right, we've got 30 seconds. I could read more comments. Jenks Left Tricep of Fury says, hey folks, happy Ice Cream Wednesday. Happy Ice Cream Wednesday to you too, sir. Or lady, I'm not sure. James says, now that he's stolen all the money, he can get out of it. He wants to, he can close down Medicare. I'm not entirely sure who you're referring to, but I'm sure it was about the Medicare Social Security privatization story. All right, we got to get back to the show. I'll see you there.
Live sex. Ice cream. Live sex. Ice cream.
Francesca, I don't know if you know this, but the country's grappling with a bit of a loneliness problem right now.
No.
Yeah.
My cat's right here. Everything's chill.
You know, there's been like this growing body of data showing that young men are feeling alienated and lonely. We did a story yesterday about adolescent teenagers and how lonely they feel. And then there's this other set of data showing that less people are having sex, which is pretty surprising because I really thought during the COVID shutdowns, I mean, what else are you gonna do, right? Like, but no, it did not increase the sexual activity in the country, and the New York Times wants to change that. So let's get to that story. A recent New York Times op-ed titled, "Have More Sex, Please," is begging all of us to do just that in order to solve the growing crisis of loneliness in America. Now, loneliness in America can be solved by more than just having sex with someone. We'll get to that in a moment. But is sex really the answer to isolation? Is there a problem with people not having sex in America? I mean, this is something that we rarely hear about, right? Well, the piece was written by a woman named Magdalene Taylor. And in it, she includes a number of pretty interesting facts about the sex lives of Americans, or honestly, the lack thereof. So let's talk about what she found. So across almost every demographic group, American adults, old and young, single and coupled, rich and poor, are having less sex than they had at any point in the last, 3 years, okay, or 3 decades, I should say. So if you look at the last 3 decades, Americans are having the least amount of sex now. More than a quarter of Americans hadn't had sex even once in the past year, the last time the General Social Survey asked, which was in 2021. It was the highest such level of sexlessness in the survey's history. In the 1990s, about half of Americans were having sex weekly, which, wow, weekly or more. That figure is now under 40%. Younger Americans are infamously less likely to have sex than their parents' generations. And when they do have sex, they're doing it with fewer partners, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. And estimates vary, but somewhere between 1/3 to 2/3 of Americans report being lonely. The number of Americans who report having no close friends at all has actually quadrupled since 1990, and that's according to a survey Center on American Life study. And of course, COVID-19 has contributed to this as well. So before I get to what the New York Times op-ed is urging us to do, Francesca, what do you think about this? And we can hypothesize.
How many times a week do you do it? No, sorry, I thought you were gonna just straight up.
You just had a baby, so right now I'm guessing not much.
Look,
but
look, I love Francesca. First of all, I just think I was watching all that B-roll footage that we were playing underneath all the stats,
You're
and getting a little hot and bothered, a little warm in this room of mine here. First of all, it's very unfair to judge this country by the last 3 years. Hello, pandemic. But yes, the stats on this go back to the 90s. Interesting. I have a problem, however, with this piece, which I read and we talked about on the Bituation Room, because it conflates sex and loneliness or not being lonely. And you can, as I think a lot of F-boys around the world, have a lot of sex and still be so broken and lonely inside. So let's just decouple that a little bit. I think it is interesting that even people who are partnered are also not doing it as much, right? So just overall, my thoughts on this are that, yeah, it's very difficult in a time of impending doom, whether that be a global pandemic or rising sea levels, or hey, I hope not to get, caught in a mass shooting when I want to go to the movies. Like, there's so many reasons that we would be on edge and unable to relax, calm down, find both the physical and the mental space to be intimate with someone. I think that's very clear. We have endless amounts of social media vying for our attention, and yet no one's taking care of us physically. You know what I'm saying? And TikTok can't give you that, you guys. And I think that also is, lastly, the point is we are oversaturated with sex when it comes to the accessibility of online pornography. And that's fine, I'm not knocking it, but that's not intimacy, that's not sex.
Yep.
Right?
I agree with you wholeheartedly on that point. And I can see how maybe some in the political group we tend to agree with would kind of cringe at that point. But I think it's a legitimate point, right? Look,
for sure,
porn's easy. You get it done. You get what you want. Intimacy takes work, and people are maybe I'm sharing too much. I don't care. Our lives are so exhausting, right? Just surviving the workload that we all have to deal with. The idea of being intimate all the time, it's just a lot of work. And especially for women, right? It's not as easy to accomplish what the objective is. You get what I'm saying? It takes
I think
work.
I'm picking up what you're laying down.
Yeah, not that there's any problem in that category with my husband, you know what I'm saying? But it does take work.
Shout out to Christian. I'm sorry. We're just gonna keep going.
Live sex.
Okay. But I think your critique of the piece is so spot on, because you're right. Conflating lack of sexual intimacy with loneliness, I think is ridiculous. I think people are lonely for a whole host of other reasons, including, lack of friends, lack of a social group, all of that. And we'll get to that in a moment, but let's actually, do some justice to the writer here and read some excerpts so you can hear from the writer herself. She says in 2021, roughly a quarter of women under 35 reported having had no sex in the past year. For men, the figure was 19%. And women who are having sex are less likely to be happy with the sex they're having. We gotta enhance communication here, ladies, okay? And don't be afraid. You let him know what he needs to do, and don't be shy about
Absolutely.
it. Absolutely. Yeah.
That is a really important point, because again, it's you can have more sex. That doesn't necessarily mean you are feeling satisfied. And what I love about this also is the studies around like sex boosting all kinds of, good things, whether it's immunity or like, mental health, like just you feel better, right? You can sleep better. Similar to exercising, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's your love muscle, people. I'm sorry. But you gotta exercise your love muscle. But if you are not engaging in a way or you don't have a partner who understands how to do it right, then that experience can leave you feeling like not so good in the end. So I think that's the other thing of we also have to increase the quality of sex that we're having.
Absolutely, and that takes communication. And unfortunately, we're in this puritanical society where all these red states don't even want sex ed for kids, right? So it's a problem because people sometimes don't have the tools to communicate those things. Now, the author of the piece ends by encouraging us all to get laid because that's the solution here, right? According to her, the loneliness epidemic may be a societal issue, but it can be solved at least partly at the level of individual bedrooms. Those of us in a position to, I just realized what I don't like about this piece. Let me finish it and then I'll explain what I mean, okay? Those of us in a position to be having more sex ought to be doing so. Here is the rare opportunity to do something for the betterment of the world around you that involves nothing more than indulging in one of humanity's most essential pleasures. I think I couldn't articulate it earlier, but what bothers me about this piece is that it takes a massive societal problem and it uses the same conservative framing of personal responsibility, right? Where it's all of the issues that we mentioned, being overworked, being stressed out with all of the stimulation, that's being thrown at us every single, that's not the solution for this woman. The solution is take personal responsibility and make sure you're getting some in your bedroom. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it's actually bigger than that. The loneliness crisis is much bigger than that.
No, I agree, but I also kind of like the prompt. First of all, it's an opinion piece. She can do whatever, but she's not gonna solve it all. She lays a lot out that she doesn't solve, but I do kind of like so go out there and get him, Tiger. You could watch The Last of Us, or you could what I'm saying. I feel like half of us are just like inertia. You know what I mean? Last of Us, I don't know how it ends. Sex, I pretty much know how it ends. I've been there before. You know what I mean? It's good ending, but so again, it's a little bit of a prodding. And I also think that in a time of bizarre anti-sex right-wing BS that we're living under, where they basically want to obliterate all sex for pleasure, I actually think it's a political, radical response to say, no, I'm gonna go try and have sex. And yes, with consent, with communication, but you got right wingers also be like, I can't even talk to a woman anymore. Yeah, you can. You absolutely can. Just don't use a corny line. Don't wear socks with Crocs, although that has been what I've been wearing lately. But go out there, smell your pits twice, comb your hair, figure out your facial hair, and go get them.
I don't know what I like a little bit of that body odor. I don't know. Okay. It's animalistic a little bit. Okay, anyway.
Pheromone.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so there's a shocking list of benefits that come along with sexual activity that I actually didn't even know about. So stuff like reducing sex and anxiety, knew about that. It does boost your mood and self-confidence. Improves cognitive health. Burns calories. I've measured this. Not really, but sure, if they want to throw that out there.
I've measured this. Only Anna has the Fitbit in bed. Only Anna's
just out of curiosity, start the workout. Interval training, that's the one I choose because there's no intercourse workout option on the Apple Watch, but nonetheless. Improve sleep, lower blood pressure, helps to prevent heart disease, didn't know that. Relieve pain. Strengthen pelvic floor muscles in women, reduce the risk of prostate cancer in men. This one shocked me, it delays menopause. I'm gonna get after it tonight. Also, it helps to pass kidney stones. So if you have that chronic kidney stone problem, get after it, get after it.
No, I think the other thing, after being pregnant, there are hormones that we rely on for pregnancy, or one of them is oxytocin, and that actually, it helps with like bonding with child and parent. It helps you go into labor, all these things. And like in my second trimester, I was high on oxytocin, and it really, you know what I'm saying? You're just like, you're sprung as you're getting bigger. But the point is that that's an actual like chemical that it gets released during sex. It's great for you, puts you in a real good mood, and also helps you birth a baby if you wanted to do that.
Love it, love it. And as we mentioned multiple times in the story, it's not all about sex if your concern is loneliness. In fact, just to pivot real quick, there was a fascinating study that was just published by Harvard University. They studied happiness over 85 years, okay? Loneliness specifically in America over 85 years. And the study gathered data from hundreds of male participants and eventually their wives and children. And what they found, I'm not gonna belabor it, is what helps people feel happiest is having a group of friends, being social. So I get it, when I'm done with the show, the first thing I wanna do is get in my car, I back up into my parking space at work so I can like get out as soon as possible to get home. And I wanna watch TV and I don't wanna talk to anybody. But on the nights, the rare nights when I do go out and have dinner with a friend, I freaking feel great about it. So get off Twitter, get offline, unplug, and actually go outside your home and meet with your friends, because I promise you the effort will be worth it. All right, bonus episode is next. It is gonna be amazing. Dennis Prager talks about how much he hates children and how mean he thinks they are. It's one of my favorite Dennis Prager moments. Don't miss it. We'll see you at the bonus. tyt.com/join to become a member. See you there.
Live sex.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lav mics. I mean, they were incredible. And then one guy walked in and gave us a really expensive switcher and said, you guys need this, and walked out. Okay, it's amazing. They helped us build a studio. They did a $2 million funding campaign for us.